Welcome to Believing Thomas. My name is Maeve, and I'm so happy that you're here. I make videos on topics exploring faith, doubt, and human design. So if any of that interests you, then you are in the right place. Today, I want to talk about deconstruction, more specifically, Christian deconstruction. Why we seem to hear of it so much, what it is, what scripture says about it, and how to approach it. My hope is to provide some illuminating information as well as provide some encouragement to you, whether you're interested in the topic as a cultural phenomenon or if it's something that's a bit more personal to you. So, as we jump in here, I think it's really important to start with defining the term deconstruction because it's just one of those terms that's gotten so loaded and weighed down that two people can be saying the exact same word and talking about two entirely different things. So, on one hand, I've seen a lot of people talk about deconstruction in a way that means disaffiliation, rejecting the faith, quite literally not affiliating with the faith anymore. And then on the other hand, I've also seen people talk about deconstruction in the sense of examining and reshaping their faith. Maybe they're rethinking what denomination they're part of, or they're going back to their childhood and thinking about the mindsets and beliefs and stuff that were instilled in them that maybe aren't biblical. And disaffiliating or rejecting the faith may or may not be up for consideration for them. I know there are more perspectives than just these, however, these are the two camps that I see the most, and frankly, what I see the very most is that first camp. Most of the time, when deconstruction is being talked about, whether by people who have rejected the Christian faith, who sometimes refer to themselves as evangelicals, you may have heard that term, or by Christian influencers and thought leaders who are talking about the topic, they're often referring to deconstruction in a way that means disaffiliating. Most of the time, when deconstruction is being talked about, it's referring to people leaving the Christian faith. Going forward, when I use the term deconstruction, I don't want to use it strictly in the sense of disaffiliating. I want to use it in a very general, very minimalist sense, simply talking about the act of pulling something apart, not so much what you do after it's pulled apart, right? Because you can have a brick building that was constructed, and just like how it was constructed, you can also deconstruct it. And then after you have that heap of bricks laying on the ground, right? Some people will look at it and walk away. Some people will pack up those bricks and use them to build something somewhere else. And then some people will rebuild right there into something different, stronger. So, why people deconstruct and how people go about deconstructing are topics that I want to dive into in a future episode. But for now, I just want to establish that when I say deconstruct, I am simply talking about the act of pulling something apart, pulling something faith related apart and examining one's faith. So, why are we hearing so much about it? If you're watching this video, you've likely heard the term deconstruction a lot more within the past few years. If you haven't heard the term deconstruction, it wouldn't take more than a quick look on TikTok, YouTube, X to find a plethora of stories from people who have left the faith, or to see posts and videos and whatnot from Christians wondering why so many people are leaving the faith. What is going on with this trend? Why is deconstruction such a thing? Why is it happening? But what I want to look at today is, are we actually seeing a huge influx or maybe outflux of people leaving the faith? Are we seeing an unusually large wave of people leaving the faith? Or are we looking at something different? By the way, this is my first YouTube video, so thank you for bearing with me because I'm trying to figure out the audio and also trying to figure out where I'm supposed to look. So thank you for bearing with me. And then also in the previous section, I was just using the term disaffiliated a lot, meaning somebody that had once been affiliated with the Christian faith, but has since rejected it. In this section, I'm going to be using the term unaffiliated, meaning somebody that is not affiliated with faith, whether they just never were or whether they had disaffiliated. So when I say unaffiliated, I just mean very generally that somebody is not affiliated with a religion, and more specifically in this section, the Christian faith. We're going to be getting into some numbers and looking specifically at Gen Z, really the teenage and 20s generation, typically those born between 1997 and 2012, so they'd be anywhere from about 13 to 28 years old. So as we get into this, we'll be comparing Gen Z to previous generations and what it kind of spells out for future generations as well. So if we look at the religious breakdown of Gen Z, I want to look at two main groups, Protestant and unaffiliated. So I'm going to be using the term Christian, and for the purpose of this video, when I say Christian, I am meaning some form of Protestant. And then for unaffiliated, I am meaning those who identify as atheist, agnostic, or with nothing in particular, ironically often referred to as nuns. So if we look at the data, we see that about 20% or 1 in 5 of Gen Zers identify as Christian. We see about nearly 1 in 10 identifying as atheist, nearly 1 in 10 identifying as agnostic, and then over 3 in 10 identifying with nothing in particular. Total, this adds up to about 1 in 2 Gen Zers being just unaffiliated with any religion at all. If we compare this to previous generations, we see a steady decline of Christianity over the years and a trend toward being unaffiliated. So, the oldest generation in our society right now is the silent generation, or those born between about 1928 and 1945. So, they would really be in their 80s and 90s. If we look at the religious breakdown of the silent generation, we actually see something really, really interesting. We see that about 1 in 2 in the silent generation identify as Christian, and about 1 in 5 identify as unaffiliated. So atheist, agnostic, or nothing in particular. So these ratios are almost a perfect mirror of each other. So silent generation, about 1 in 2 identified as Protestant, to now Gen Z's 1 in 5. And then for the silent generation, about 1 in 5 identified as unaffiliated, to now Gen Z's 1 in 2. I don't want to go too deep into this just because it's a lot of numbers, but if we look at the progression throughout the generations in between the silent generation and Gen Z, again, I gotta check my notes here. We see that about 1 in 2 in the silent generation identified as Christian. It moved down to 1 in 3 for Gen X, 1 in 4 for millennials, to now 1 in 5 for Gen Z. As for those that identify as unaffiliated, we see that increase throughout the generations. So again, for the silent generation, we saw 1 in 5. That increased to 1 in 4 for boomers, 1 in 3 for Gen X, 2 in 5 for millennials, to now 1 in every 2 for Gen Z. But now we're seeing the turn of the tide into now about half of the current, young generation, teens and 20s, are religiously unaffiliated. So we can assume that for Gen Alpha, Gen Beta, we're going to start seeing a majority of those generations being unaffiliated, atheist, agnostic, or nuns. So, yes, Gen Z is the least religious generation in America's history, but is this caused by an unusually large wave of people rejecting the Christianity that they once identified with? I would argue no. So, examining, rethinking, and even leaving one's childhood religion is nothing new. Within the silent generation, it was quite common to stay with one's childhood religion, and we have seen that number change a bit over the years. However, it has stayed very much the same over the past few decades. It was about 19% for Gen X, 18% for millennials, and now 19% for Gen Z. We're seeing that about 1 in 5 Gen Zers leave their childhood religion. It is quite similar to the way it's always been. So what's happening here? Why are we hearing so much about deconstruction and evangelicalism, so to speak, these days? There are 3 main reasons I want to look at here. First, people are disaffiliating, people are leaving their childhood religion at an earlier age than previous generations did. So, if we look at those who disaffiliate by the age of 18, for previous generations, it was anywhere from 30 something to 50 something percent would leave their childhood religion by the time they turned 18. For Gen Z, that number is 75%. So we go from like a third to half of people who would reject their childhood religion would do so by the time they became an adult. We're now seeing that three-quarters. And why people are disaffiliating at a younger age is a topic for another time. However, it's not entirely unsurprising when we live in an increasingly secular world and a decreasingly religious world where the church doesn't have as big of a role within society as it used to, which actually goes into my second point. Gen Z is more likely than any previous generation to say that they were never religious at all. We're seeing the decline of the church within society, resulting in fewer and fewer children being brought up in church or being exposed to religion at all. 43% of Gen Z who say that they're unaffiliated were raised unaffiliated. We're also seeing an increase in those who are unaffiliated staying unaffiliated. Okay, so the third reason I think we're seeing so much talk about deconstruction and all this type of stuff is the rise of social media. So we're having these conversations about faith in ways that we've never had them before. In the past, if somebody were re-examining their faith or thinking about rejecting their childhood faith or whatnot, this was often something that was handled privately or in very small circles. Social media allows younger generations to talk about faith very publicly. They can share their thoughts and feelings, their experiences, their stories, their doubts, their questions with a large audience all at the press of a button. With about 1 in 2 Gen Zers experiencing doubts about their faith, regardless of their faith. We all have so much more exposure to this topic, which might make it seem like it's happening a lot more. I don't think it's because we're seeing so many more within the younger generations rejecting Christianity. What I think we're seeing is just the continuation of a trend, away from Christianity and towards being unaffiliated. I also think these conversations are so much more public and so much more common to talk about. And honestly, that's one thing that I love about my generation is that we don't just want to believe things because maybe it's like the beliefs that we inherited, right? It's what the people around us believe, or it's what our parents told us to believe, right? My generation wants to, like, Gen Z wants to ask questions. Gen Z wants to talk about these things. And I think that is good. So, what does the Bible say about this topic? And how should we as Christians approach this topic in our own lives? And there are a lot of verses that I wanted to talk about in this section, and I will surely talk about them in the future. But for now, I just want to focus on one, which is 1 Peter 3:15. So, 1 Peter is the first of a couple of letters that the Apostle Peter wrote to some Christians in a handful of Roman provinces when they were in need of encouragement in their faith. And he tells them, and I'm actually going to read it from right here. It says, "But in your hearts honor Christ as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and respect." We are not to hold to something just because our parents did or because the people around us do. We are certainly not to yield ourselves to a blind, thoughtless, soulless faith. And I think that topic of, is faith blind is so important. I will go on to argue. I don't think it is at all. I think Christianity is the opposite of blind faith, but that is a conversation for another day. In this verse, Peter talks about the importance of knowing why you believe what you believe. Questions are not the enemy, and doubt is not the opposite of faith. On the contrary, asking questions in pursuit of truth is a good thing. We should neither espouse nor reject something without honest soul searching, good questions, and careful thought. Like I mentioned earlier, in future episodes, we will explore so many more of topics related to this, so I know that I can't get into everything here right now. But for now, I just want to leave you with a question. Well, I guess 2 questions. No matter who you are, no matter what you believe, what do you believe? And why do you believe it? If you have made it this far in the episode, thank you so much. You seriously rock. It would be so appreciated if you left your thoughts down below, if you gave it a like, a share, if you subscribed. I know that I've quoted a lot of statistics and numbers in this episode, and so I've linked all my sources down below if you're interested in looking more into that. In my next episode, we will be digging into a word I've used a lot during this episode: Christianity. Christian. I think it's so important to be really clear about what Christianity is and what Christianity isn't. And I want to talk about the actual gospel Christianity, the Christianity of Christ. I'll see you in the next episode. Much love.